It's a sensitive subject, and I can't think of anybody better to present it. Many years ago, and now most of you remember Fritzy, and Fritzy Petrie, she was our outreach director. She and your dad were very good friends. She pointed me in this direction to lead a conversation about this. So I'm going to turn this over to Matt. Mulhane, thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm not the best public speaker, but I'll do my best. A little bit of the history of who I am. I'm Matthew Mulhane, fifth generation funeral director at Mulhane Home for Funerals that we own and operate with my father, Stuart. Probably most of you know, but he's fourth generation. We just celebrated our 150th year last year, 2022, from 1872, and we're located in Millbury, Mass, but we serve Sutton communities, Grafton communities, Worcester communities, so we're all over. So that's a little bit about us. I don't want to talk too much about us. I want to more answer some questions and give you some information about planning funerals, about funerals, pre-planning, ahead of time, things like that. So I don't have too much. I'll talk, kind of like if I talk to a family coming in for a pre-arrangement, then maybe we can ask some questions and I can get more specific if you want. So there's a couple different ways. Probably the biggest phone call I get is a phone call from somebody and they say, I want to prepay my funeral. But there's a lot more that goes into it than just prepaying. So there's different options that you have. A lot of times we pre-plan. There's certainly every funeral home, if you call them, will sit down and talk to you about some information or answer questions. So there's no obligation when you make an appointment and come in and sit down. There's nothing you have to bring. You could just come in and talk about wishes. We could give you information and go from there. And a lot of times it's very helpful to have information on file, especially death certificate information. So just because you don't prepay does not mean you cannot pre-plan your wishes. It does not mean you can't give us information. We give you information to take back to your families and talk to them. In one of those booklets there, I did provide an information sheet, which is helpful to a lot of families. That information is everything that any funeral home needs to complete paperwork. And a lot of times I have families who have a passing suddenly or not suddenly, but they don't have it done, and they're scrambling to try to find that information. You know, Social Security number, date of birth, parents' names. You know, I don't have to get into in depth of what we need, but a lot of times children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, they're trying to scramble for that information. So sometimes it's good to at least have it written down somewhere where they can find it, or on file at a funeral home that you want to go to. And also for those in here that are veterans, it's also very important to have the DD 214 on file, either with your family again or at the funeral home, so they don't have to look for it. But that is one piece that a lot of families like to find and have trouble finding, and you always want to have that available.
What is the name of that again?
That's a DD 214 form. It's basically the honorable discharge for any veteran. Any veteran who is honorably discharged from the military, any branch, is entitled to a two-person crew to come out. And we'll talk about different types of services. It doesn't have to be at a cemetery. It could be at the funeral home. It could be at the church. But they are, as a veteran, you are entitled to the two-man crew to come out, play taps, fold, and present the flag. And you're entitled to a flag from the military. So with that form, we're able to get that for you. And also, if you are at a cemetery, sometimes you see that flat marker on the ground, that veteran marker. They are entitled to that too, if you're buried in a cemetery. So you do have the pre-planning options, coming in, getting wishes down. You also have some prepayment options. And a lot of the times we do prepayments is in the state of Massachusetts, it's illegal for me to take, or any funeral home, to take funds and put it into our bank account, which is good for you because that requires us to set up like a second party account, either a trust or some type of insurance product. I don't want to get too in-depth on each one of those because every funeral home uses different types of products. But we do have a trust product where we could take funds and put that into that account, and then the only way that we can get that money out is with a death certificate. So there are ways to prepay. Briefly on those, unless people have more questions on the prepaying, which I can answer, is those trust accounts can be made irrevocable. The reason you want to make it irrevocable is if for some reason you have to go on to Mass Health from the state, they require that you have no assets to be accepted onto Mass Health. So whatever you put into that funeral trust, it cannot be touched by the state. It's a non-asset. So it does not count against Mass Health. Again, to remember though, whatever you put in there has to go towards funeral expenses at the time of passing. So if you are on Mass Health and you put a certain amount in there, it has to go towards the expenses. A funeral home legally cannot return you funds from that account if you're on Mass Health. It has to be returned to the state. So you never want to get too much into that account. So there is the trust accounts. There's also insurance products some funeral homes have, which is basically a funeral insurance. It's not one you take out from MetLife or anything where you make payments on it. It's a one-time trust. You can open it up, insurance policy. You can make payments on both, so you never have to prepay anything the full amount of what it is today. I have some families that open up a trust account with us and make payments. Like each month they put $100 in. That trust, we use New England Funeral Trust Company. They're in Cambridge. They've been around for about 75 years. And it's like, we always call it like an open bank account. You want to open it up for a certain amount, like $500, you can. You could put money in there. You could put money closer to the amount that it is. And then also that account does earn interest. But of course, as everything else, interest rates are extremely low. But everything in that account, even with the interest, will go towards the expenses of the funeral at the time of passing. So those are your options of pre-planning and kind of prepaying. To wrap up the payment part, there's also people have, I have a life insurance policy. So some families have a life insurance policy that they bought on their own. It's their own life insurance policy. So sometimes we can put, at the time of passing, you can put an assignment on that insurance policy, which means, let's say it's a $20,000 policy from MetLife, and the expenses come to, let's just say, $10,000. You can assign the funeral home at the time of passing the $10,000. That comes directly from the insurance company, and the rest will go to, of course, whoever's the beneficiary. Some families have to turn over that policy sooner because of Mass Health reasons. So if it's a Mass Health reason, and you do have an insurance policy to pay for burial expenses, that insurance policy can still be used. You have to turn that policy over as the owner and the beneficiary to the funeral home before applying for Mass Health. So I don't know if I was clear on that, but if you have a MetLife policy and you're going to apply for Mass Health, the state will require you turn that policy over to a funeral home as owner and beneficiary. That means that it's a non-asset of yours, and now you can apply for Mass Health. So I won't talk too much about Mass Health, but if there's any questions, we can answer those at the end. Some of the other, this catalog, this one here that looks like this is a good one. People like it. Some people fill in. It has a lot of places in there where you can get things ready for your family, as far as if you have bank accounts, if you do have life insurance policies, what the policy numbers are, where they are. From experience, I sit with families all the time, and well, my mom has a life insurance policy, but I don't know where it is, and I don't know the name, and I don't know the number. So that catalog is sometimes helpful to people to get things in order, get preferences in order. If there's a safety deposit box, if there's a bank account at another bank, you can put that information in there. And then I would at least let your families know kind of where they are, and that's going to really help them and make things easier at the time. So that's what that booklet is kind of planning things ahead of time. Some people use it, some people don't. Some people fill in the whole thing, some people just like certain parts of it. But there's passwords in there, phone passwords to write down, so there's a lot of things you don't think of at the, that your family might have to get to at the time of passing. I thought too we could talk a little bit about different types of services. I think it's very important to talk to your family and loved ones and people who may be in charge of thinking about your wishes, but also asking them what their wishes are. I have a lot of families from experience who say, well, my mom just wanted to do this, but we kind of wanted to do this, but I want to respect my mom's wishes, which is completely true and should be followed. But a lot of times, you know, I hear things and I hear things like, well, I don't want people looking at me, or I don't want people seeing me, or I don't want to make a big deal about me, which is true, and I sometimes feel the same way, but you also want to make sure that the funeral or visitation or any type of service is for you, but also for your family too. So I think it's important to maybe talk to them, ask them some questions, what they like, what they've liked from past experiences going to different funerals. I do, my father, did I mention my father? Everybody knows that. My father was 70s and 80s. Every single person that came through was boom, 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 boom. Same thing. Calling hours 2 to 4, 7 to 9, funeral the next day, burial the next day. Probably if we have 5 families come in a week, every single service is different. Calling, some people want calling hours, some people do not. Some people want a visitation, some people only want visitation. Some people want to go to church the next day. Some people want to have the funeral in the funeral home. Some people just want to have a graveside. Some people want cremation. Some people want cremation first. Some people want cremation after services so they can still be present in the casket for a visitation or viewing. So every single family that comes in is different. So there's a lot of different types of choices on services. There's a lot of different options that you have. I would probably say the biggest thing we do is we try to personalize each service, personalize the obituary, personalize the visitation or the service or the graveside with photos, video tributes, personalized tribute cards we have. I put, Mr. Perry had a tribute card, I remember, because there was a photo of him in front of the Sutton Center stone right there, and that was the whole tribute card. So we've tried to personalize everything to each individual person. So I would say it's important to talk to your family, ask them if the visitation is important, if viewing is important, is a funeral mass, a funeral service important, is a burial important. So I can answer any specific questions, but services have become so personalized, you can really do anything. I suggest to families finding out what's important, what the most important part is, and then kind of coordinating around that. So I don't know if there's any questions on different types of services. I know cremation has become a lot more popular and will continue to be more popular. An important part of cremation you want to remember is cremation is just a different type of disposition. Some people are buried, some people are cremated. You certainly can still have services before the cremation. You could be in a casket, you could have viewing, you could go to church, you could do the service in the funeral home, you could have a life celebration. Then the cremation can happen. Also, too, with cremation, people aren't really sure. Cremains can be buried, of course, in a cemetery. Cremains can be taken home. There is scattering regulations that families have to follow when they decide to scatter, but that's completely up to the family. So cremation is becoming more popular, but just when we have cremation, there are services that can go with it if you choose so. I have some families that do, some families that don't. But a phone call that I get a lot is my father just wanted to be cremated. Or he said he wanted to be cremated, but we never talked about if he wanted any type of services. Military honors, visitation, church service, something like that. I've done services. I do services almost every week with an urn, with cremains, and we still can go to church. We still can go to the cemetery. We can still have a visitation, even though there's not a viewing of a person in a casket. The urn is displayed, and photographs and flowers, and people can pay their respects to your family, and a good way for them to be able to say goodbye. So that's kind of an overview of services and cremation too, because I know that's on a lot of people's minds, but are there any other questions about services, or? Yep.
I noticed in the obits now,
Yes.
they keep them short.
Yep.
Because the Telegram and Gazette charges by the line or something.
Yeah, it's like by space. I think it's paragraph-wise, but yeah.
And some of the obits say, go to the funeral
Yep.
home's website.
Yep.
Now, are funeral homes charging people for that service?
It's different in every funeral. It's not the problem, but the funeral industry is a little bit different and has been for a long time. The honest answer is that when funeral homes first started back before, and even when we started a funeral home, everything was priced in the casket. So there was no professional service charge. There was no charge because people were doing things in their home. So everything was based on the casket. As years went by, things kind of evolved and pricing changed. Not the problem, but every single funeral home charges different for different types of services. We have and I don't really want to, I will, but price-wise, I didn't want to get into a lot of pricing, but not this question, but personal for us, but we have a lot of packages, which basically takes everything and puts it into one. So probably a longer answer than you wanted is that the use of my website is included in my professional service charge. So it is included in there. You might get a funeral home that says the use of the website might be $150, but most funeral homes, I would personally have to say, the use of the website is included in their professional service charge. So I wouldn't say it's an additional charge from their already charges.
But it seems like, if you have long obits, some of them, I count the lines, I can't believe them.
Yeah.
And if you put the same thing into the website.
No, you can put as big as you want on my website.
Then what I mean is the price difference.
Yeah.
How do you?
So basically what it is with the Telegram, they have a portal, and I'll explain. So over the years, the Telegram has been bought and sold, and I think now Gateway Media owns the Telegram. So it's all about inch and space. So a traditional obituary, you would see an average one, I'm telling families, is about $550, $600 to put it in the Telegram, the physical paper. And it goes up from there. The more you put in, the more it's going to be. Some families are still saying, I want the full one in, no matter what it costs. Some families are doing the small one and directing it to the website. If I took that same $550 or $1,000 or $2,000, for me to put it on my website is exactly the same charge. There's no charge by space.
Why do you think people are doing it then? Because I think some people, well, I thought that would be something the funeral parlor would do because they're nice, you know. But you're kind of saying that the funeral parlors are actually charging basically the same as the paper is.
No. So so what that is basically I have a memorial package, or it's included in what we charge. So it's not so if you came in and said the Telegram obituary is $550, so okay, I do not add $550 to my bill. The use of my website, no matter how big your obituary is, could be 2 pages long, is the same for when you come in. Because when you come in and do a service, whether you do cremation or funeral or calling hours, there's what's called a professional service charge. That's basically how funeral homes charge for their service. So our service charge includes any size obituary and the use of my website, no matter how big.
Another question I hear people talking all the time, Is there some rule or law in Massachusetts that you can buy a casket on the internet and you have to accept it as a funeral parlor?
Yes, yep,
How does that work? I buy my casket
Yep.
and I have it delivered to your place?
right.
And can I negotiate like their casket price and your casket price?
Not my casket price personally, because like I said before, and it's a good point, remember how I said before, everybody priced their caskets and caskets were real high? That's all changed over the years. And I take my Mulhane Home for Funerals casket price on what I charge for caskets, I would go up against any internet company.
Even Amazon?
Probably not Amazon. But again, I would suggest looking at our caskets and our prices personally, if you came to Mulhane Funeral Home, and then compare them to the online. And I would say they probably beat us by $100 or $200, but you don't have to go through the delivery, and you know what you get because it's right in front of you. You don't know where that casket's coming from. But we've set up our pricing that if a family comes into me and says, we bought our casket online, I say, okay, and we accept it. That's the casket that you want. I'm not going to try to sell you a casket. I'll show you what we have. But if you decide to go online, but that's really where those online casket companies got popular, is because certain funeral homes were still charging a high amount for their caskets, because that's how they always traditionally did it. They never changed over to provide service. So we more provide service than casket, but we do have a nice showroom. But our caskets compared to, I mean, I can't say definitely, but there's always different types of ranges of prices of caskets. But I know there's a popular website, I think it's Titan Caskets, that's coming on. And they do sell, so it is, but that's a good thing to come in and plan and see what the casket prices are, and then compare them.
Is the casket price in your complete package?
Not yet.
No.
Not yet.
When you do a package.
Yep.
And somebody takes an extraordinary casket or a less,
Yep.
or the one they get on the internet.
Yep.
How do you deduct that from your total price?
I don't have caskets. My general price list, which if you came or requested one, I'll get you one. Our general price list is just service. And then we have a casket price list.
Oh, it's
So a
separate.
funeral, some funeral homes, that's when the pricing gets different. I've seen some funeral homes that have a package of service, casket, and vault, and it's one. We right now have a package of service, and then you add the casket and add whatever vault you want to. So when you came in, I wouldn't have to deduct the casket because it's not included in our service package.
Okay.
But eventually, if we got a service and merchandise package, then you also have to, legally by law, I have to itemize statements. So sometimes people come in and what they want to do doesn't fit the package, then you go itemized charges. So you can pick and choose what you want. You don't have to have the package.
Now, I could
Yeah.
jump in there. There was a senior here that bought a casket through, I believe it was Walmart.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of, you know, sight unseen, it gets delivered. It's not quite what you saw, and then it was damaged. So now they've got the headache of trying to send it back and get it replaced, so you might want to think twice before you have the delivery. Yeah, it was quite a mess for them, so.
I think that's where the reputation did come from, because they have, the caskets were the one thing that funeral homes sold, and it was high, and they didn't change that. And then all these second parties started coming, and then we realized, well, you have to kind of charge for what I do, and I provide service. I have caskets, but I don't make caskets. So that's kind of how it's changed. But I would, visiting a funeral home, you can ask for the general, it's a good question. Because if you go to a funeral home or you call a funeral, if you physically go to a funeral home, it's state law, if you ask me for prices, I have to give them to you. And a funeral home, which I don't have here because I didn't want to get into prices, but if you want me, I will mail you one, or I'll bring some here. A funeral home has to give you a general price list, And the general price list is all services that we provide, from cremation to embalming to everything. And then it is their choice, but most funeral homes will give you a casket and a vault price list. So a funeral home has to give you prices, and more likely they're divided up into those three.
Now, how come, I know I'm asking a lot of questions.
That's okay.
Everybody can ask one.
That's okay.
Why does the state get involved with all of this? Where funeral parlors get a little shady on things?
Yeah. It's not this, I wouldn't say it was the state, I would say it was the FTC. And then they came up with the funeral rule. The funeral law rule, and I wouldn't say it's Massachusetts. I would have to, I mean, we're talking about funeral homes all over the country. So like every single industry, whether it's funeral homes, sometimes churches, sometimes there's always going to be one or two bad funeral homes that give the rest of the funeral homes a bad reputation. So it wasn't just Massachusetts, but what happened was the FTC was starting to get complaints on pricing. And they felt as though that if someone goes through a time of, someone passes suddenly, they wanted a way to regulate funeral homes on what type of pricing they were giving to families, because they felt as though they were grieving, which they are, and going through a difficult time, didn't know what, so they wanted specific price lists. Because you are right, if you call your plumber and say, how much is it to fix my drain, he doesn't have a general price list, he just tells you a price. Funeral homes have to give you a general price list and a date, effective date, which says these are the prices for what, so you can select what you want. So I wouldn't say it was, in general, all funeral homes getting shady. I would say it was a few bad funeral homes doing the wrong thing that kind of gave everybody else a bad reputation.
And plus now, you've got all these big companies buying
Yeah.
your funeral.
I don't see it too much in Massachusetts. So Massachusetts State, and I'm on the Massachusetts Funeral Directors Association Board of Directors. And the FTC rule, I'll let you know, is they're kind of changing it now, and they might regulate us to make us put our pricing online. Because the world's kind of changing, and that's what's changing with the telegram too. I sit with families, I don't want to jump around, but I sit with families and they talk about the telegram, and it's your children or your grandchildren, and they don't get the newspaper anymore.
Yeah, right.
And they get it online, or they get it at legacy.com. So that's why you're also, not only the price, but you're also seeing society kind of change, so people aren't getting the telegram anymore. They're not printing it as much. So that's why you see smaller obituaries, not just for the cost, but because of the value they see putting it in the physical paper compared to putting online. So the FTC is changing too, by requiring us to put in the next year or two, by putting our general price list online. But, back to the corporation, you see the corporations a lot in Texas, a lot in California, a lot in the larger states. In Massachusetts, we're still pretty traditional with small family funeral homes. You got us, you have Roney Funeral Home, you have Paradise Givner. You still have small independently owned funeral homes. The reason you still see small independently owned funeral homes is because in Massachusetts we're regulated. We are not allowed to own cemeteries. We're not allowed to own flower shops. We can't own a casket company. I can't own a monument company. So they regulate us pretty strictly that I can only be a funeral home. The reason you might see corporations not around here as much is because the corporations want to do everything. And in Massachusetts, they're not allowed to do everything. So you'll see them out in Boston, not so much around here. But if they change the rule and you see us being able to do an all-in-one, like I can't have a reception area, I can't do a catering. You go to funeral homes in Florida, they have the funeral home, the reception hall, and the cemeteries out back. And they're a corporation because they can make money on all that. And they're the church too. So you might see it in the future if regulations come, but funeral homes are starting to close too. There's not a lot of the smaller funeral homes that maybe don't have a next generation, they don't have somebody coming up. Not too many people get into funeral industry. There are more people coming into it. But you're going to see in the next years, I wouldn't call it corporation, but I would say smaller funeral homes start to close because there's no one to take it over. And maybe the profit margin isn't as high as in the past because people aren't having as much services, and that's just the truth. If you're not having traditional calls, there's not as much profit. If there's not as much profit, there's not people getting into the business. So you will see smaller funeral homes close, and then those, like hopefully us and others, you'll probably see one funeral home per town. Any more questions on services or personalization? I got this, I don't know if I held it up, I've been talking a lot. But this one here is another catalog we had. A lot of times, you know, like I said, personalization of the service. I have women who love quilting. We've put blankets they've quilted, quilting tools, put them out at visitation. My mother's friend Barbara Swenson was a big painter. She loved to paint, so when she passed, we put all her paintings around the funeral home. So that booklet's kind of good, like hobbies, organizations you're a part of, to write them down, things you liked, music you liked. I've played all different types of music on the background at visitation and different types of things that the people liked. We've had motorcycles out front, I've had trucks out front, so anything that you think would be important for people to remember, that catalog is pretty good. But that's what we try to do now. I know sometimes a lot of people don't like to make a big fuss about themselves, but a lot of times it's good for the family to heal, it's good for the people to come and pay their respects to a widow or widower, children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews. And it's good for people to come and pay their respects. So that catalog's pretty good. I also had things, we talked about caskets. You can pre-plan, you can pre-select caskets, you can see prices. I would suggest going to a funeral home and looking at their price structure, how they do things, how much, there's 20 gauge metal, there's 18 gauge metal. It's hard for when someone comes and says, I selected this metal casket online, can you match it? Well, there's different type of gauges, which is thickness, there's sealer caskets, there's different types of interior, there's velvet interior, there's crepe interior, there's wood, there's poplar wood, there's solid wood. So if you saw something, or you could always go to a funeral home, see their catalogs. We have a showroom and catalogs to know what you're buying from us or buying online. But you certainly can look at caskets. Can't guarantee that it'll still be there in the line, but if you had a dark brown metal or a cherry casket, we certainly can match kind of what your wishes are. And it takes a lot of stress away from your family at the time, saying, well, your mom really liked this cherry poplar wood. She selected this, and they say, go with that. That's what she wanted.
Can you get one with a bell in it?
I can get anything. I can get anything. You got monument selections too. Monument selections too. Like I said before in the conversation, we're not allowed to own a monument company, but I certainly can direct you. You got Whitesville Monuments here close to Sutton. You have Rex Monuments, people we work with. You can get into cemeteries. If some people have cemetery plots already, you can put a monument up so people, your loved ones, don't have to worry. Certain towns sell pre-need, which means you can sell ahead of time. Sutton sells pre-need to residents and non-residents. Millbury Central Cemetery, they sell pre-need. Most towns, you cannot prepay the opening and closing, which is the opening and closing of the ground, which could be for an urn or for a full casket, most towns. But Catholic cemeteries, or the Diocese Cemetery in Worcester, St. John's, St. Philip's in Grafton, Worcester County Memorial Park is a popular cemetery. Those places can be prepaid in full ahead of time because they are private cemeteries, not town. The town public cemeteries don't accept the opening and closing charge. But you can prepay to purchase a lot, purchase a 2-grave lot, or maybe a larger family lot in the future. So cemeteries do accept prepayments and pre-scheduling, and you can set up those monuments too, if you wish. Services, yeah. Oh, it's okay.
I just thought of another
Yep,
dumb question.
that's all right.
With cremations getting popular,
Right.
are the crematories getting backed up?
Nope, even during the pandemic around here, I know there's a lot of stories coming out of New York, but even with the pandemic here, I mean, it takes a little bit longer. We always tell families it's about 5 to 7 days from the time we bring you to the crematory. Because again, in the state of Massachusetts, which is good and bad, I'm not allowed to own a crematory. And only the ones that are grandfathered into cemeteries are allowed. So there's one at All Faith Cemetery, which is the old Swedish cemetery, and there's one at Rural Crematory. Both were running full through the pandemic with death rates a little higher, and both were able to serve all the way through. Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Funeral Directors Association, which I'm on the board, did a study to make sure, and even if the death rate doubled in Massachusetts in 1 year, the amount of crematories in Massachusetts would be able to handle all the cremations. Because they have some pretty large ones out in Boston. And then also too, with cremation, he mentioned, it brings, I mean, there's a lot of different things we can talk about. With cremation in cemeteries, sometimes cremains can be buried over existing lots. So if you have family or you have a plot, you can always bury cremains over an existing burial or in a family plot. The one thing you got to watch out with that is the amount of space on the monument to put names and things like that. So if your parents are buried and they have a lot, technically you can bury cremains over them in most cemeteries. I don't know of any that don't allow that. So if you are...
Is there a time frame, like one time I had heard 7 years, so what is that?
Time frame for...
If somebody was already buried and then somebody died, to be buried in the same...
As long as it's in a, so some of the older, old, before they even, so now they require concrete vaults for caskets to go, and that's probably been around since the 40s or 50s, that they require vaults, maybe later for the towns. Before that, they buried just the casket. So some places, like in St. John's, you can actually reuse the grave because it's been so long. Nowadays, most burials we have, concrete vaults are already in there, so there's no disintegration. But there's enough room between the top of the vault and the top of the ground to either put a cremation vault or a burial cremation urn in. So you technically, if you bury over a concrete, you don't have to wait.
Do you assist with direct cremation?
Yep. So it's required.
I mean, I know it's certainly you
Yeah.
should charge for that.
Yeah, we do everything from direct cremation to traditional. So in Massachusetts, which is heavily regulated, is also good. They don't allow crematories to be funeral homes.
Right.
So whatever, if you decide to cremation with service, without service, direct cremation, you have to go through a funeral home. So we provide that service all the time. Monuments and services, you can pre-plan services with churches. You can select music, you can select songs, you can select readings, how you want the celebration to be done or the service. I even have people that want to get so in-depth that they choose the prayer card. So you can do as much as you want or as little as you want. You can get the information. I think getting the information and talking to your family is the most important. Finding out what they want. For them to be able to find the information easy takes a lot of stress away from them at the time. So that's one thing. And then if you ever wanted more in-depth charges, see how the price structure is, you certainly can contact any funeral home, me, and sit down and get more in-depth on charges and things like that. So I don't really have too much more, but and that anybody has any questions about anything, I can answer anything. Yep.
So if you have a cremation,
Yep.
or somebody has a casket,
Right.
I don't know if you know it, at the cemetery, is the cost the same of opening the grave?
It's not going to be, so purchasing a grave is the same. Opening, closing is always going to be less. Let's just take, for instance, because it comes off the top of my head, so in Central Cemetery, which is the Millbury Town Cemetery, during the week, it's $800 to open and close for a full casket, full vault. During the week to open and close for a cremation is $400. So it's usually half, maybe a little bit less. Every cemetery has a Saturday charge. They charge a little bit more on Saturdays to open and close. But I would say on average, if you looked at every single cemetery, I'd have to say it would be half of what full compared to a cremation.
And people still get buried in, buried like relatives and how much? What are the rules about that?
The state of Massachusetts, you can, any person can handle the services themselves. You'd have to get permission from the town. The Board of Health of the town would have to approve it. So I don't want to say that you can do it. I don't want to say you can't do it. I would say it depends on the town you're in. Like if it was Sutton, of course, that we're in Sutton, we'd have to get the okay from the town and the Board of Health. Because you have to register paperwork for every single person. So if someone passes, there has to be paperwork registered with the town or city of passing, and then the town or city of residence. We have to get a burial permit. That's what gets you death certificates. But every single death has to be registered and filed with the town hall or city hall. Then they release a burial permit. The Board of Health releases the burial permit, so more than likely the Board of Health would have to approve that burial on your property. And then I'm sure every town, I've never seen it, but I'm sure every town has regulations on if it can be done or not.
I just wanted to clarify for Sutton.
Sure.
I work for the town hall. So they can be, each lot may contain a single full vault, one full vault, and 2 cremation burials, or up to 4 cremation burials.
Yeah.
I just didn't want you to think that there could be like 8 cremations.
No, yeah, that's a good point. There is always, each town and cemetery has a number that you can have. Like in Millbury, it's 1 full burial and 3 over the top. Another thing with Sutton too is if you're burying cremains over an existing full concrete vault, you do not have to have another concrete urn vault. If there is no one in that grave and there's no concrete vault there, you have to be buried in a cremation-sized concrete vault. So if you have someone buried and they have a vault, you can bury anything you want over the top of that vault. If there's no vault in that ground, you have to get an urn-sized vault. They make the concrete, they make the concrete urns, it's like 12 by 12. If there's no one in there, so that's because of sinking and things like that.
Yeah, right. Well, my wife and I, we have 5 lots at Dulwich
Yep.
Cemetery.
Okay,
And my wife and I, we've been visiting,
yep,
we've been cleaning stones.
right,
In one cemetery, you ever been to Dodge Cemetery?
I think so.
Yeah. My wife and I, we cleaned 240 stones.
Yeah,
And we're getting involved, so I know a little bit about cemeteries.
right,
And that's why I'm asking
that's okay,
these questions.
yeah, yeah. Oh,
But
it's
that's a
good.
good point now. So we're gonna be cremated,
Right,
so we have to have a vault. But, yeah, okay, and then the urn,
yeah.
because there's no vault there already.
So you have to have a concrete vault. But the good thing about the concrete vault, you could put any type of urn you want in. You could have wooden urn, you could have metal urn. Sutton right now doesn't have regulations on what type of urn you bury. I think it might change because a lot of cemeteries are starting to have, it's called Mackenzie or the Dynasty urn. They're basically marble tone outside, fiberglass on the inside, and threaded. A lot of places are accepting those as urns and vaults. But the good thing with the concrete urn, a concrete urn vault, is you can put any type of urn that you want in there.
I'm also with a group of 4 or 5 guys. We're resetting a lot of the stones.
Right.
And you can see, like you said, in the old days, and that's what we're working on, old cemeteries,
They settled,
without the vault and the cover.
yeah.
I was doing one, and I went up to my knee, and, you
Yeah.
know, and we're hoping we don't see the bodies.
Yeah,
They sit right up
Yeah.
front,
yeah.
right?
So they'll settle, they'll sink.
That's the main reason to have the concrete wall.
Main reason to have it, and also too, sanitary towns regulations will be for sanitary reasons. You know, before, you know, back long time ago, there wasn't many regulations. Now you have like drinking water, runoff water, sanitary reasons that they require. So in Massachusetts, it is not a state law. I cannot make you have a vault. But the cemetery policy requires
Yeah.
you to have a vault because of sanitary and
Yeah.
safety reasons.
Well, do you know the history of, over in Europe?
Yeah.
That at like sometime, 100 years, they take it out and they, somebody else can be buried there, the
Yeah.
whole thing. Now, what do they do with the bodies that they take out?
Well, they can do that in St. John's when they've talked about, I've had experience with reusing a grave. And over a certain amount of time, everything just really disintegrates. They might find some bones. I've never been to one where they've done that, but also in Europe, the reason they do that too is it's such limited space
Yeah,
over
yeah,
there.
yeah.
So they can reuse the graves. How they do it, I don't know. They probably have, I mean, after 100 years, there's not gonna be much there. But, I mean, they probably sift through the dirt, things like that.
Any other questions?
Any questions on types of services or those types
How's
of?
your, how's your competition, like, this Mercadante, he
Yeah.
seems to be doing a lot of them.
Yeah,
I'm Italian, but I
Yeah.
don't think I'm going there.
That's all right. I understand.
But that's a family thing too.
That is a family thing, so they're gonna, but again, they're not corporate, you know, but I know Kevin and Michelle and,
Kevin,
I mean, most of the, in Worcester, they kind of bicker a little bit. In the towns, we all get along. I help Chris Roney, I help out Brian Givner, I go to Jeff Koopmans in Northborough. The towns, we really, the cities, they might bicker a little bit, but everybody really helps out each other. There's no corporations.
Yeah.
A corporation tried to start out in Brookfield, it's called Dignity Funeral Home. They sold to, Lamro, I forget the last name. I'll think of it. But the corporations tried to start out in Brookfield, because there was one family, and he owned like he owned all Brookfield, East Brookfield, West Brookfield. So he had 4 funeral homes. And that corporation wanted them to come in, and he bought all of them, and the corporation actually wasn't making enough money, so they sold it back to the family, to the son. You know, Mercadante has a very big staff. They got a big facility there. They do a great job, but I mean, they're still family owned. You see the Miles Funeral Home out in Holden has a very large facility and a large staff. So like I said, you might see these large funeral homes starting to purchase these smaller funeral homes, and then they're starting to become one. So you might see the bigger funeral homes become bigger. You might see Mulhane Home for Funerals become bigger. You never know. So
Well, Fazio, I mean.
Fazio's gone, yeah.
They don't seem to do too much of it.
no.
Yeah.
That's and the same with the, apologize, Manzi Funeral Home.
Yeah.
You know, Manzi Funeral Home, they got to a point and there was no one that really wanted to get into it from the family, and the children decided to sell. And Mercadante got a lot of that business, so you're going to see funeral homes either sell or close, and then that business has to go someplace else. So I wouldn't worry, the corporation's really not a thing for me, but I think those funeral homes are going to start working together, coming together, and you're going to see larger places own more. You know, the other problem in Massachusetts is land. Oh, it's very expensive. Or you'll see the small funeral homes, like our funeral home, Turgeon Funeral Home, they were all built on Main Street in mansions. It's not large parking lots because it used to be just houses. So you have smaller funeral homes that have smaller areas, so you're going to see those funeral homes purchasing other funeral homes around instead of all having it at one funeral home. So you might see like satellite locations.
How about,
Yes, sir.
how about the military funeral,
Yep.
like the big one in where, Virginia, wherever it is? Arlington.
You got Arlington.
How do they keep those so straight? Because we're resetting stones that we have to, if you look at the
Yeah.
burial of the military, how do they do it to keep them?
They probably have hundreds of grounds crew.
No, I mean, no, but.
Oh, set straight.
Yeah, how do,
That probably set with that's, you see that, you see on TV, you see that white monument that you always see in the national cemeteries? It's actually probably double that size, or maybe 3 times that size. 3/4 of it is in the ground, set.
I was wondering if they make a foundation or something.
I would say so.
Yeah, because the ones we're resetting, they.
There's no foundation.
Yeah, well, some of them do, but, you know, we have to, we're actually pouring
Yeah.
new foundations for some.
Well, that's what they're doing now. If you went and purchased a new grave, a new monument, and you put it on your grave, the town or the monument company or the private cemetery will dig a foundation, and every single stone has a concrete foundation
Yeah.
that they attach that stone to.
I think you mentioned how deep the military ones are.
Yeah.
Well, there's a rule that we discovered, that whatever is on top of, like the slate
Yeah.
stones, 1/3 of it is in the ground.
Yeah.
Now, that's my knowledge. Cemeteries.
Anything else?
That was something.
We'll make an appointment.
Yeah. Just give us a call, we'll get you in. If you have any other questions, I got business cards up here. If you have any other questions, just